Let's kick things off. Thank you very much for everybody joining us today. This afternoon, we're going to be talking about the market as it is. It's, these are clearly unprecedented times, and we fully appreciate that there's a lot going on in people's personal lives, but people are also affected by the market as it stands at the moment. And we've had a huge response to this webinar, and a number of questions have come through along the same theme, and someone's out of the left field. So in our 45 minutes, we will endeavour to answer as many as possible, but there probably won't be the chance to answer them all, and we'll hopefully pick that up in another webinar, maybe in a week or two's time. We are a panel of agents, lawyers, journalists. We have made a solemn promise to keep our answers short, but in terms of our lines of work, we might go on a little bit, but we will try and pass the baton as well. I think this isn't just a question and answer session as well. This is a discussion. There's a lot of miles under our tires here in terms of market knowledge, and we may not agree on everything, but we'll be coming from a place of knowledge and understanding, and I hope it'll generate quite a bit of debate as well for the terms of buyers and sellers. So if I start by letting everybody introduce themselves. Gemma, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, so I'm Gemma Bruce. I co-own a real estate agency selling property in Italy, and I also run a for sale by owner platform, which is sort of mid to high-end properties worldwide. So that's me. I'm not in Tuscany, I'm in the UK. This is a backdrop of a rather lovely house that is for sale in Casa Country at the moment. So Casa Country is my Italian business. The viewing is the for sale by owner platform.
Right away, that's a wonderful sales pitch, Gemma. Well done.
Yeah.
We all get a share of the commission, by the way. Okay, Rob, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, well, actually, I am in Antigua right now. No, I wish I was. This is Half Moon Bay in Antigua behind me. So I own and run Sphere Estates, which is a mid to high-end luxury real estate business, focuses on properties all around the world, marketing a range from resale properties, unique and interesting, even off-market properties, and we specialize in particular in branded residences. So we have properties all over the place.
Okay, thank you, Rob.
Okay.
Peter, one of my colleagues at Judicare, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hello everyone. I'm Peter Estes from Judicare. We're from solicitors, and we deal with a whole range of different jurisdictions throughout the world, mostly doing legal work to do with property in some way or another. So buying, selling, probate, wills, litigation, whatever it is. Great,
thanks, Peter. Liz, journalist and editor of Replacing Sun. Tell us a bit more about yourself.
I've been writing about overseas property for 20 years, travelling the world, sadly not right now, but I've been working with Jonnie on Place in the Sun for 10 of those years. I do that still, and I also write for the UK newspapers on property, UK and overseas.
Thanks, Liz. And last but by no means least, Charlie.
Hello, everybody. Thanks very much for getting on. It's very nice to have the opportunity to talk to you. My name is Charlie Smith. I've been in property now almost 30 years. I obviously started very young, and I'm one of the principals of Prime World Property, which is a general domestic and overseas residential property advisory business. We also run the world's leading luxury auction house in the EMEA region. So we're responsible for some interesting different methods of buying and selling real estate.
Great stuff. Thank you very much. Just briefly, my name is Jonnie Irwin. I present Place in the Sun on Channel 4. I've been in property not quite as long as Charlie, but not far off it. I was a surveyor by profession. And I too travel the world looking at helping people buy property, essentially. And I think that's where we should maybe kick off. We all have our specialisms in our specific territories. I think, Liz, out of the panel, you probably have the broadest reach in terms of overseeing the market. Give us a snapshot of a couple of territories, because I understand there's a few territories running at very different speeds at the moment.
Well, I mean, the trend even before the pandemic was very much France and Spain being very, very popular with Brexit, a deadline approaching, and demand for both those countries is still very, very popular for the same reasons. And in the trend that we've seen of people, going to less far-flung places, staying to safe and established destinations, that's just going to get even more so after this. So I think demand is good in Spain, Portugal, France. Those are the key ones at the moment. But I'm sure Rob will tell you about some other far-flung places where there is demand as well.
Can I just ask you quickly before we pass over to Rob? I read somewhere, it might have been something you wrote actually, Liz. In Florida, they're still doing physical viewings. Is that right?
Yeah, in Florida, they're making sales in Orlando, and it never really closed down. And there was property viewings right through the lockdown, because the governor of Florida put real estate as an essential business. But Miami was closed down. But no, there's been deals definitely going on all that time.
Okay, I think we can drill down into that a little bit later on. Let's talk about the market in general and what we're hearing and what we're seeing. Rob, are there still buyers out there?
Yeah, there are. I think it's really a question about timing. So what we've seen over the last 3 or 4 weeks is a steady increase in the number of inquiries being made. So the interest is definitely there. People are sitting at home using their time to look up properties either to rent or to buy once this pandemic is over. They're doing their research now. And what we've also seen is some developers are now allowing people to make provisional reservations on properties, which they weren't necessarily allowing before. So people are placing reservations without any real commitment, but it puts them at the front of the line. So as soon as markets do open up, they can jump on a flight, get out there, go and have a look at it, and they'll be at the front of the queue. So pretty much, as Liz was saying, the hot markets that we're seeing for now, traditional European destinations. France has been incredibly good for us in the last 2 years. It still remains one of the top performing European countries in terms of demand. But Portugal also is doing incredibly well. We signed a reservation yesterday at a resort called Umbria in the Algarve. It's not a definite sale, obviously, but it's the first stage and allows that person to book a flight as soon as able to get down there and have the pick of the bunch.
I mean, I've just had a message come up from someone actually, and if anybody would like to ask a question, please use the Q&A tab, not anything else on there, just because I cannot multitask as much as anything else. But there's a gentleman here who mentions he's just reserved 3 properties in the last 2 weeks and 2 pending. So there's a one-man property line right
now. But Johnny, I'll just say, I was asked exactly the same question. Is it now the right time to start a search? And I think if we realise that real estate is a long-term play, it's 5, 7, 10-year play. It's not an immediate thing. It's a tangible, usable, fun, memory-creating asset. So that's leverageable. So if we think about the downturns that we have had previously, whether it was the financial crisis or whether it was some of the other terrorist atrocities and things that happened in Europe, there's been a very quick bounce back from some of those poor moments. And I think it would be sensible, for people to think about, I think Rob touched on it as well as Liz in a way, about the accessibility of things. Think about the airport that services the destination that you want to go to. Perhaps be a little bit sort of cautious of airports that are served just by budget airlines, where perhaps we should be looking at where the flag carriers fly to and have that long-term view. Now is absolutely the right time to think about it.
Yeah, good idea. I read somewhere that, sorry, Gemma, go on.
We've been actually genuinely surprised how many inquiries there have been. And I think, Rob and Charlie, I think you find the same, that we presumed when all of this hit that it was going to be very quiet. It was for a couple of weeks, but there is a quality to the buyers coming through as well. I suppose that the buyers that I'm dealing with fall into 2 categories. There are really very serious buyers coming through, and you can tell us brokers, because we've done this for a long time, you can tell by the questions they're answering and the level of detail that they're asking for that they're genuine and they're serious. The other type of buyer that we're dealing with, they are genuine and serious, but they are looking for the deal. So as we come out of this, those first properties that go at reduced prices, they will be the ones jumping on. And I think the other thing that we've really noticed for Tuscany is we deal with city properties, we deal with properties in the immediate suburbs of Florence, but also a lot of country properties. And there has definitely been more demand for good quality agricultural estates. So properties that have a lovely residential house, or even a property that's divided into apartments so they can generate income from rentals, but then with good quality agricultural land. So olive groves, arable land where they can grow sunflowers or whatever else. So,
and Gemma, do you think that's changed? Sorry, do you think that's changed from where it was before? Because there was a flight to cities, wasn't there? We see this in many places. Cities are getting bigger. Country house market is slowing down. Do you think that this has changed literally because of the current sort of COVID-19 situation?
There's been a swing. And obviously we will need to look back at this in a few months' time, but based on the past few weeks, there has been a swing towards more countryside inquiries. We always get inquiries for the countryside, but we've had lots and lots. Our strongest sort of area has been central Florence and the immediate suburbs of Florence. There's definitely, for us, in that part of rural Europe, that is the move that we've seen over the last few weeks.
Well, that's actually one of the questions that has come through. I mean, you're talking about, it's amazing this hiatus that we think we're looking at. But I think one of the big property portals gets its biggest spike, I think, on Christmas afternoon, and that lull when people have nothing to do and they start looking. But what the number of the delegates have put some questions through asking, as you just have done, Charlie, about what kind of property might not necessarily be in vogue, but what might the shift be towards? And someone has asked, maybe you could kick this off yourself, Rob, would there be maybe a bit more interest in self-sustainable developments and developments that can clearly operate and run smoothly during a lockdown?
Absolutely. I mean, we're seeing a growing demand in that. We were seeing a growing demand in that area pre-COVID-19 anyway. Looking for sustainability, wellness benefits as well, and it's definitely a trend that's on the up. Mm-hmm. So a number of the resorts that we're selling, for example, are now heavily featuring, focusing on sustainability. It's not just in terms of the materials that they use, but they also want to know that their property is going to be cost efficient to run. A number of these resorts have their own organic farms, so they produce a lot of the product that gets consumed either in the restaurants or delivered to people's homes. And then on the other side, we've got the wellness, which is a huge business. I think it's about $919 billion is the size of the wellness tourism market. So that's huge, and we're seeing now developments incorporating that.
But we've definitely seen a change as well in terms of the buyers. So there's, as Gemma said earlier, lots of people doing serious research, but I'm getting a lot more inquiries now about lifestyle. And what we're seeing is a lot of people in this situation taking stock of what they're doing with their lives. And I've now seen a lot more inquiries coming through about people actually wanting to move abroad and actually do things like that, because they've actually sat there and thinking, actually, do you know what, let's take the opportunity of actually reassessing our whole lives and actually working out what we actually want to do. So I think there's a change with that, and that may reflect the thing that Gemma was talking earlier about moving out more to the countryside, away from the cities or whatever it is.
Yeah. We'll get talking about, it's interesting because there's a lot of questions asking about what we perceive will happen to prices and a downturn. And I've just seen a question from a gentleman called Mark wondering whether he should be taking advantage of maybe a swing. But before we go to that, I think, should we not try and discuss the aspirations of clients and how they might have changed? Charlie, you alluded about the maybe a move from the cities, the countryside properties. What do we think people will be looking for moving forward? Not just, surely it's not just a bit more space.
I think no, you're right. And I think it's the exaggeration of probably where we were before that Peter's just touched on. that there is, time is such a valuable asset. And I think you'll find that, you know, the new developments, the turnkey, sustainable living, in touch with everything that's going on, that's a fundamental change that's happening with the world, that we're trying to get greener and smarter in the way we live. So having somewhere where you can fly on a plane for a quick weekend 4 or 5 times a year probably is going to go out of fashion. That's the wrong word. Perhaps the whole change is that's not going to be happening. So it is perhaps going to places that are accessible, but people are going for the longer term. Again, just to highlight what Peter has said, that, you know, people are thinking we're going to spend more time here. So as opposed to a very occasional home, or perhaps with some of the people we're fortunate enough to deal with that are buying 3rd and 4th homes, perhaps it's actually now concentrating on 2 homes, having just a single second home somewhere, but it services all that they need.
This is maybe turning back the clock prior to budget airlines, when people had that, as you said, that second home rather than just the weekend bolt hole. I mean, Liz, you probably see these kind of surges, don't you?
Yeah, well, actually, I was just going to mention that I've been talking to a few agents this morning, and there's, with the flights not being running at the moment, there's quite an interest in locations in France and Spain that, you know, you can actually drive to, because there's a lot of people hoping to reach their second homes this summer. There won't be flights probably, but they can, perhaps the borders might be open to drive down. So I think access and airfares are probably going to rise after all this as well. So I think access is going to be a key issue. And as you say, yeah, I mean, just before the global economic crisis, we were going to more sort of far-flung, exotic destinations, cheaper Eastern Europe, but that's all finished. So definitely, I think, stay closer to home, and indeed some people will probably end up buying in the UK instead of abroad, but that's a whole different subject.
Yeah,
I think on that, you know, a lot more people will probably use Eurotunnel, where they can stay in their car.
Yeah.
They don't have to actually mingle with people, you know, and they're quite happy to spend 4 to 8 hours or whatever driving to their destination. You know, and we also have to think how are airports going to change in future. Are they going to have a situation where when you come in, you know, the whole process of being scanned takes much longer. You might be quarantined for a period of time on arrival. So, you know, your 1 week holiday might include 2 or 3 weeks in quarantine. So it's going to be difficult. And I think, you know, more and more people will start driving. But having said that, on the long haul destinations, certainly in the, you know, the upper end of the market, we've been seeing incredible demand growing for places in the Caribbean, Indian Ocean, places like the Maldives. They tend to be obviously very, very wealthy people. They're not so affected financially by what's going on. And many of them also have access to private jets. So that's another area that's actually starting to benefit from.
Yeah, and there's places with lower populations. I know you were saying when we were chatting a couple of days ago, Rob, places with a lower population may well have a draw to buyers who have been really unnerved by all that's going on at the moment.
Yeah.
Well, it looks like we could see a slight shift in the type of location, the population densities, and also the style of property. It could be, sounds like it could be people looking at properties they'd rather be stuck in for more than 2 weeks rather than the 3 or 4 days and what have you. But let's talk about timings then. I mean, it seemed the property market, the overseas property market, we've been through quite a lot, haven't we, over the past few years. Every bump in the road we've managed to get over. And at the start of this year, I think, looking all around the panel, we were thinking, you know what? I think we're looking good now. Straight road ahead. Brexit's done. The pound's starting to look like less shaky. No bumps in the road this summer. We can now launch. Lo and behold, this happened. But we've still got some of the, you know, look in your rearview mirror, you've still got things like Brexit that should be and probably are influencing the market, are they not? Liz?
Yeah, I mean, talking to a big agent in France this morning, and 80% of their buyers are looking to relocate before the end of the year. So getting out there is going to be key, by September. It can take roughly 3 months to buy in France. So September is their key deadline. And same with Spain to some extent. So they really need to get, they need to get on with it. So that's why we're seeing a lot of appointments being made in a hope that they can get over there July, August, September.
Yeah. Interesting, because people look at the luxury market and they think it is just that, but there is a certain necessity to this, isn't there? There's a time scale that people need to adhere to, and some people do need to move house, Gemma.
Yeah, and I think that's where we as agents and websites representing good properties that are on the market, where we need to advise our sellers is to have as much documentation and material available for those properties as possible. So as much of that shortlisting work can be done prior to a buyer travelling. So to have a full buyer's pack, so all of the due diligence done on the property. So the property is absolutely sale ready to go to the notaries. And we have, it's not been a major part of our business previously to have video tours. However, on a daily basis at the moment, we are being asked for those video tours. And I think we're very ready to advise our sellers on what those video tours need to consist of, because it's not just a quick walk around the house. It's really stopping, showing those wonderful views, showing what it's like sitting under that lovely tree in the garden, what the approach road is like, what it feels like when you get out of the car and you arrive at the property, which are all the sentiments that are absolutely key to falling in love with that second home. So we are doing a lot of work around those video tours.
It makes the decision process much quicker, doesn't it? So when the person does arrive, they're there and ready to go.
Yeah. Much quicker. I mean, I don't think many. Sorry, Johnny, do you want to carry on?
No, go ahead, Bob.
I was just going to say on that, I mean, we've started doing the same, doing virtual tours if it's something that's off plan, needs to be high quality. If you've got a ready built property, then obviously video tours, but you can still also do the 3D walkthrough tours, which are really, really good now. They used to be quite jittery, but they've improved a lot. And it just helps you get that buyer to maybe 98% of the way across the line. Most of them will still want to visit before they sign a bit of paper and pay over any cash. Really, it does happen. We're seeing very, very occasionally a few sales are going through, whether it's in London or overseas. And on that matter, I mean, they're trying to make it easier in different countries how you can complete on a deal if you can't be there in present, yourself. So whether it's with the power of attorney, etc. I know in France, they have a new decree, I think, from the 17th of April, which allows the notary to sort out the acte de vente via webcam. And that's completely new. It's never been done before. And I think in Portugal, they're talking about the same thing. So that might be something that comes in to effect within the next week or two.
I think, Rob, that this hopefully is the start of us all as agents, lawyers, notaries, etc., a new, more efficient way of working. So rather than us taking clients to see, my business partner, Jeremy, who does most of the tours, he would, it's frequent that we take clients to see 20 plus properties before they find the one they want. But hopefully this new way of working will streamline that to narrow down, and not just during the pandemic forevermore, to a really excellent selection of maybe 5 properties, then buy from one of those 5 and not have the painful process of all the paperwork in between, that actually the notaries will be more available to remote signings and electronic.
It's great for the buyer as well, because you save them time. If a buyer can pretty much make up his or her mind that this is exactly what they're looking for, then when they do come out, it's just a question of final checks, making sure that is the right location, orientation, whatever, and then signing. But
well, that's one of the questions actually that's come through from one of the delegates. They were saying they're happy to sign a reservation agreement and put down a deposit, but they want to visit prior to completion. and potentially get the deposit back if they're unhappy with that. What would their rights be? Is that possible, Peter?
Yeah, it certainly is. I mean, in a contract, you can make a contract subject to anything. So if everyone is happy, you can always make the contract subject to a viewing, for example, which makes it very, very easy. Mm-hmm. And then in the contract, you can set out that you get your money back if you don't like the property or whatever it is. So it's certainly possible to give some confidence to the seller that they've got a potential buyer lined up subject to the viewing or whatever it is. I mean, think of it a bit like subject to a mortgage in the UK. You just have it subject to a viewing.
Sure. So the mechanics can be put in place. Do you think we'll start to see perhaps more flexible approaches from sellers then, Charlie?
Yeah, I think it's going to be important, certainly for the seller point of view, how they're going to get and how they're going to generate that interest. You highlighted just a minute ago, Johnny, somebody saying what's going to happen with prices. So nobody really knows what's going to happen with prices. There's history about what's happened before, so we can read into some of that. But it will be driven by the supply and demand, of course. And just we talked about, just for a moment, about people now going to bigger estates, more elbow room, perhaps they're coming away from cities. We're complete reversal of how the trend was just a few months ago. These things are always cyclical. So at the beginning of the year, it was the time to buy a country house because nobody really wanted them. Now, if that's changing again, if it were me, perhaps I would look at things that are slightly more inaccessible to get to in cities. You know, that might be the place to go to put your money depending on where your driver is of why you want to buy, having an idea that's 5, 7, 10 years plus. I think when you've got a property for sale, it really is the bottom way of just trying to find the way to generate the interest. So if you're a seller, you've got to think about the power of PR and what Liz can do for you. And I've worked with Liz on a couple of things, a very successful auction that she helped us with. And remember that your agent is first and foremost a communication business. So give them the story, give them the facts of how, on your behalf, they're going to generate you the interest to find you a buyer. Different ways of doing that. We've all got our different opinions on it. But that's certainly the fundamental point is think about alternative ways of generating the interest.
Now, before we go into too much of the prices and creating demand, Charlie, you've got a good insight into other ways that a seller might approach the market.
We represent a leading auction business in the EMEA region, and we've had some good success over the last few years with luxury property auctions. Some of the markets around the world, I would say the majority of markets around the world are soft. So there are a greater supply of product than there is a demand. That's fundamentally how it is. And the auction has come in and helped people, help sellers deliver a sale. It delivers the liquidity of an asset that's traditionally very illiquid in a 6-week cycle. And it delivers market price in that given window just by the very amount of interest that is generated. There's specifics of how that works. But I think the principle behind it, John, is even if you take auction to one side, it's still the point that within a 6-week cycle, it brings all the attention on that one property. And I think that's my point really, that as a seller, I've got a nice asset that I need to sell. I need to get the attention. I need to get people looking at it. Of course, traditionally, what you would do is you would go for a price reduction in markets where you're uncertain. Are they really effective? Ask yourself, are they really effective? Having a guess is not normally a robust strategy to getting a good solution, which is what a price reduction is, right? I've got it listed at €1 million. So I'm going to guess that if I knock 100,000 euros off, I'm going to generate more interest. So I'm going to put it at 900,000. Perhaps that's not the way to do it. I think you need to speak to your agent, you need to listen to their feedback and objectively listen to their feedback and their market commentary based on the comparables. So if there is a house just up the road that sold for $1 million, so you think your one should sell for $1 million, just be realistic whether it really is comparable. So I think it's those sort of points that you can, different ways around it, most certainly, but getting the attention on your property for that given window, whatever it is, a month, 6 weeks, 2 weeks, whatever it is, that's what you need your agent to do.
Gemma, you mentioned earlier about marketing initiatives, you know, in order to try and get your property ahead of maybe other properties. You help sellers all over the world sell their properties. What approach do you think a seller should be making at the moment? What kind of initiatives or what relationship should they have with an agent, for example?
I think that there are different ways to go about it. I think one of the questions that came through prior to the webinar today were, you know, how should you appoint an agent? Which agent should you use? You know, should you have more than one? And I think that in itself is an interesting topic, because it's one thing, the marketing of the property. So you need to make sure that the agent or the website or whatever you use to market your property is going to have the reach that is right for you. So identifying the nationalities that have bought in the country where your property is in recent times, so over the last 18 months, 2 years, something like that, to make sure that the marketing is getting to those countries around the world. And then I think then secondly, whether it's yourself doing it as a seller working directly, or whether your broker's going to do it, you need to make sure that you're going to have the right individual personalized conversations with those sellers. So I think what Charlie was talking about, I think is really valid, that actually if your agent who you've appointed, yes, fine, they're doing the right marketing, they're bringing the buyers through, make sure as a seller that your broker is having the conversations with their database of buyers to really explain the circumstances of your property and test their appetite for price. You know, if you've got your property on the market, say 2 million, 2.5 million, is it worth saying to your broker, will you have a conversation with all of your buyers in your database who have budgets from, I don't know, 1.4 million upwards? Yeah, it would be a huge cut to be selling at 1.4 if you've been asking 2.5, but it might just create the momentum to get you a 1.7, a 2 million sale price. It might be a better strategy than just immediately shaving off the 20. I think we in Tuscany at the moment, we feel that probably 20% off asking price is what's likely to happen. But perhaps without jumping in and making that slash, actually having that rapport and those conversations at an early stage might be more effective.
And remember, as a seller, you don't have to take the offer, of course, yeah. And you're protected, right? I mean, your listing price of 2.5 million remains the same. It's such a good point, Jeff. So your listing point remains the same. It's a very private, personal thing. But I wonder how many beautiful houses, there all seem to be beautiful in Italy, but I wonder how many beautiful houses there are for sale at 2.5 million in Tuscany and Umbria. A lot. There will be a lot. So as a buyer, when there is a greater supply than is demand, how am I as an owner going to get that buyer's attention? And that's the way to do it. Yes, you can do an auction. The auction crystallizes a market price, and it can be quite harsh to realize that, most certainly. But its premise is to generate the interest. That's the thing. It stands out more than anything else. Yeah. It does it with time with regard to the auction, because you say it's going to be sold at the end of the month. You know, this property will be sold on the 30th of May. Be under no illusion it won't be for sale on the 1st of June. But it's that immediacy and fear of loss that goes in that helps just create interest. So I think it's a good idea, Gemma.
Yeah. We used to certainly put low asking, well, not always, but I'd often put a low asking price in as a bed, everything above it, just to generate that early interest. And as you rightly said, it's up to the owner whether to take the offer or not. But there are other incentives as well, not just price, to try and get people looking at your property. New developments, for example, Rob, I mean, guaranteed yield at the moment must be looking rather attractive as long as it's underwritten, surely?
Absolutely. But I mean, you know, most of these guaranteed yields are guaranteed by the developer, so they're not a bank guarantee. So it's worth investigating, first of all, the credibility of that developer. Look at their track record, how financially strong are they? And then look at the terms. But yeah, certainly across parts of Europe, you can get anywhere between sort of 3 and 8% guaranteed yields. Some offer even higher, but obviously the higher you get, there tends to be greater risk in most cases. And obviously, if you're buying something in a branded development, you're going to pay a premium for that. You know, so your yield will generally be a little bit lower potentially, but in the long term, you know, you should have a safer exit strategy. So, you know, in 5, 6, 7 years time, if you come to sell it, it might be easier to sell that property than something that's not branded. You know, as is always the case with any property, you've got to look at the unique wow factors about a property, what makes it stand out and different from the rest. And I think, you know, that will obviously invariably affect the value of property as well. When we're talking to sellers, you know, talking about, well, that property sold for 2 million, and mine's just around the corner, so it must be 2 million as well. You know, you do have to compare, as Charlie was saying, and say, well, you know, what's unique about your one? Is yours as good, or is it better? Or, you know, and quite often sellers will have an inflated opinion of value on their property because it's personal. You know, they love their property, they bought it for their own reasons, but not everyone is going to feel the same way about it.
For me, it's at least encouraging to hear people talking to you about that place sold for X rather than that place is on the market for X.
Yeah.
Because you start using comparables for on the market prices, that's when they go bananas.
But it's quite
talking about.
Sorry, just to finish on that, it's quite difficult in some markets to get you know, accurate information. You know, here in the UK, it's much easier. You can go onto the land registry and you can find out exactly what a property sold for, but it's still in many countries there's not that transparency. So even property valuations in many cases, particularly if you've got something quite unique that is rural, there's not a great deal to compare it with. So valuers are having to use figures of on the market, you know, asking prices as opposed to actual transactions.
And these second homes, Rob, there is a value to a phenomenal view, and there is a value to a beautiful, mature garden. You know, they are. You can look at any government statistics, but they're not going to take into consideration those really unique aspects of the properties that we all deal in.
Yeah, I think also in resort properties, you know, it's not just about the property, so it's about the level of service that you get, access to amenities, is there concierge, what's security like? So all these different factors come into a buyer's decision-making process.
It's a big job. It's a big decision to make, isn't it? So that single asset versus maybe estate or development living, isn't it? Do you find, Rob, and I'll ask Gemma, you the same as well, and the panel perhaps, do you find buyers sometimes still weighing up to, or by the time you're talking to them, have they made their mind they're after a single asset or they're after development?
Yeah, no, I think vast majority are probably decided which way is their preference, but most are open to opportunity. So, you know, if we get an inquiry for someone looking for an individual property, we will say tell them the pros and cons of buying that property, and then say, but it's, you know, you might want to consider, based on what you've told me in terms of your lifestyle aspirations, you know, your concerns about it retaining value or being able to rent the property out, also, you know, dealing with the running costs of that property, then, you know, a managed property within a gated resort might actually be better for them. And many of these resorts are now trying to redesign their master plans to fit that sort of buyer now. So rather than all being, you know, in a dense development, you know, you're getting these lovely villas with more space around you, more seclusion, great view. So you get the sort of the benefit of having an individual property, but within a managed resort.
I think, and Jonnie, you will have experienced this doing what you do on the TV shows, but buyers just trust us as agents. Like, yes, we're agents. We try, you know, we know how to talk the talk, but we also know how to guide you through your search. And if we throw in a kind of trump card, or, you know, if you say, no, I want a standalone property or resale property, and we suggest that it's worth taking a look at a property on a managed estate as a total alternative, it will be worth you seeing it, because some of the best sales we've done have been properties that did not tick nearly any of the boxes of what the buyer had said at the outset, and yet they fell head over heels in love with the property that we, by instinct, because we've done this for a long time, we knew it was worth showing that property. And then the buyer turned up, and as you've experienced, Jonnie, the wife burst into tears, and it's a sale.
I think, I know there's people that have joined us from around the world, so apologies if we're being a bit UK centric at the moment, but there seems to be a subconscious distrust of an agent in the UK. And I think when you go to overseas, you do need to put your trust into an agent a whole lot more, because you spend so much time with an agent as well. In the UK, you might meet them outside their house. Abroad, you'll probably be driven around with them. You might do viewings over the course of a few days, and they will get to know you, and they will hope you, they may well say that, I know you're looking for a 200-year-old ruin, but actually this place is done and you won't be moaned at for 2 years. You know, they do get to understand the buyer a lot more. So I do hope people do entrust an agent a little bit more.
Well, I think the biggest concern is, you know, foreign laws and taxes. So you need someone, you know, who's going to give you that professional advice. And it's not just coming from an agent. You know, a good agent should also be able to introduce you to the right lawyer, proper legal advice that understands the law of the land there, but also how it might impact you depending on your own situation. Tax advice as well. It's all really important.
No, look, I know we're hurtling towards getting on and finishing this. I've got a couple of question and answers, but we'll try and do quick fire in a moment. But there is an overriding question we're being asked, and it's kind of an elephant in the room at the moment for us all. We've talked about sellers, how they might best approach the market, but there's a number of people online now as well asking that clearly some investors are going into the market. Should private buyers also be looking at this as an opportunity? And if so, where do we think prices and values may go? Sorry, I had to ask it. I know you're not Nostradamus, but let's kick off. Liz, I mean, any idea on prices and what the market might look like in the coming months?
Well, I just think it varies on location, like everything. And I don't think there's going to be massive reductions in popular locations. I saw one of the questions we got prior to the session, are there going to be deals on beachfront? No, because beachfront, for the reasons that Gemma and Rob have said, there's a limited supply. So I actually don't think there's going to be massive deals in large parts of France or Spain. The two markets that I know well, or even Florida. I think the demand's going to be there. It might be pent up. The domestic markets are going to be strong again. So that.
But again, is that not a way of protecting yourself as a buyer, though? Finding a premium product that will always retain something very special, positioning normally on a beach or some fantastic rental income. Rather than bottom feeding, rather than looking for what's cheap, finding something that you will desire and the market might desire moving forward.
Sure. And there's going to be properties that there's going to be people during this crisis that have to sell up because they've lost their stocks and shares, they've lost money, they've lost their job. So there will be opportunities, especially on resale properties. You know, the same rules apply, that anything where there's a finite quantity, you're going to have more buyers than properties available. So,
well, Jonnie, I mean, you're a property man, as we all are, but it's an asset that stands up quite well against other types of investment at the moment as well, isn't it? It's a tangible asset, surely.
Yeah, exactly right. And you know, it's the private individual that says, "Is it time for me to get in?" For sure. I mean, it's a leverageable asset. Find out why your motivations for buying. And I think the big summary, the one thing for me, if I was talking to somebody today starting on their search, do your research. Do your research. Think about why you want to use it, where you're going to go, get the help that you need, and absolutely make the plunge. You know, indifference and indecision is never a good thing. So if you're minded to do it, now is the time to do it. I suspect the lending will be at rates that will be from an all-time low with everything that's going on at the moment. I would certainly look at some of those places, to come back to Liz's point, some of those places that have stood the test of time quite well. I think some of those markets are very overheated. You know, I read something about a market recently that had dropped before COVID-19, that had dropped 30% over the course of 12 months. The market hadn't changed at all. The destination hadn't changed. What had changed is there was a huge oversupply. So I would look at those places that are offering the quality of life and the accessibility. Milan, Barcelona, these sort of places, I would think it's a fantastic place to go and buy, to have 5, 7, 10-year play. I was in China doing a presentation quite recently, and this Chinese fellow who had bought a property in Barcelona, had never visited it, bought it off plan, wondered whether he'd done the right thing. When did you buy it? I asked him. 5 years ago. For absolutely sure you would have done well. And of course we followed up with him, and he'd done very well on his investment. So I think buying those things that are in the right places of why you want them, your motivations, having done your research, will stand you in good stead.
I think the ski market is also a good one. We've definitely seen over the last 5 years that market has remained strong when others have sort of fluctuated.
And is that because of the rental ability, Rob? Is that because of the rent? So yeah, because you tend not to use them so much, right? You're probably only there for a couple of weeks of the year.
Well, that's changed. That's actually changing now. So if you go to resorts like, you know, Verbier, Megève, and other resorts like that, we're seeing almost as many people there during the summer months. I mean, it's a much shorter period, but they have all sorts of festivals. All the slopes turn into cross-country cycling tracks.
Yeah, good point.
It's big business, so they can now actually generate more income than in the past. And summer holidays in the Alps is, you know, lovely.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
I think there is a huge amount of positivity. And you know, I don't think all of us, we're not doing this webinar today because we're all feeling desperately worried about the future for us. We all genuinely feel very positive. I would say there are opportunists in the market, and we're well, myself, and I think probably the other brokers here would agree. I'm absolutely happy to work with someone who wants to try and get a real steal because of what's happened over the course of the last few weeks. My advice would be, if we're going to go in really low with an offer, do it, but it has to be a really strong offer in every other respect. So a really tight, short time scale. So be prepared to buy it without seeing the property, and make sure that there's a good deposit going down, and that's straight into escrow, and that you're providing a proof of funds or proof of however you're financing the purchase, so that when we go to the seller with that painful offer that's way under what they're expecting, that we can back it up with as much strong material as possible. That would just be my advice for that type of buyer. And you know, we're happy to work with you.
Absolutely. We've got a buyer buying at the moment who actually offered less than somebody else, but the seller actually took him more seriously because he was able to move more quickly and all the rest, and he didn't take the other person seriously. So he actually decided to sell at a slightly lower price because of that.
Yeah, the ability to perform is so important in these times as well, isn't it? You know, you've got purchasers at one end, Liz, as you were saying, that are looking down, you know, the ticking time bomb of Brexit restrictions, and then you've got people that are looking at just making the most out of this current environment, aren't you? I mean, you guys must have received calls or emails of people looking for deals, private investors and professional investors now.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think, though, that, you know, in terms of London, certainly over the last few years, a lot of people were expecting 20 to 30% off new build properties. And in some cases, they were getting that, especially if it was institutional buyers looking to bulk buy. I think what's happening now is, you know, when the market starts to open up again, which, you know, probably not until August or sometime around then, you know, we're probably looking at 5 to 10% deductions, more or less. I think most agents in London are predicting that sort of margin, but it will depend on location, quality of property, etc. And I think, you know, speaking to our partners across Europe, America, Middle East as well, they're feeling the same sort of margin of discounts. But most buyers initially will probably, you know, be like rabbits in the headlamps, you know, and too afraid to move too quickly because of perceived risk.
I think it's probably worth saying that in my experience, agents will always be wary for someone looking for a deal just based solely on price. There has to be some personal investment in the area or the property itself, because so many people looking for a deal, it'll fall out of bed by the time it gets close to exchange. I'm sure you guys will agree.
Yeah.
We're running out of time, but there are a few quick fire questions, and we will be doing another one or two of these webinars, and we will be having a varied panel. So I definitely want to make the most of the people who we've got at the moment. Just briefly, question for Charlie. Does your auction business have any experience with large, unusual properties in Southern Cyprus?
In Southern Cyprus, no, but it's in true salesman answer, it's a market we'd love to be involved in.
There you go.
but we haven't yet, but we would certainly like to. We've operated in 29 different countries. Over the last 4 years, I think we've done 40 sales, something like that. A low of $1 million to a high of 26 million. So, and funnily enough, 61% of our bidders, I checked this before we came on, 61% of our bidders over the last 4 years were bidding sight unseen. So even in these times, people are bidding sight unseen. So we'd love to get involved in Cyprus.
Great. Peter, I know as a law firm you cover Cyprus, but also there's a specific legal question for you. Can I legally split purchase price between real estate and kitchen fittings or chattels to reduce the tax bill?
Yes, you can. And people have been doing that for many, many years. The important thing is that is done accurately and at a level that is acceptable. So if you artificially increase the value of the contents in order to reduce down the taxes on purchase, you may get yourself into trouble. But providing they actually reflect reality, that should be no problem at all in pretty much any jurisdiction.
Okay. Question for Gemma and Rob. Do you think a lot of the demand is UK driven or coming from further afield? What are your
I was going to say, can we make sure we answer that one? So Steve, who asked that question, and I know I can answer this on behalf of Rob, Charlie and myself, who are all the sort of brokers. All of our businesses, our buyers come from all corners of the globe. So it's, we are absolutely, we do deal with British buyers, but they are a small percentage of the buyers that we deal with from lots of other corners of the globe and other nationalities.
Between the referendum and the last general election, we definitely saw a decline in British buyers in terms of inquiries and actual transactions. And so a lot of our attention focused elsewhere. So we were getting a lot of buyers from Benelux, Belgium was one of our strongest markets, Switzerland, Scandinavia, Middle East, even the US as well. So like Gemma was saying, you know, our audience is very, very varied. After the general election, we suddenly saw a surge in the number of people from the UK inquiring. I think it's interesting to point out as well that, you know, if you're looking at buyers registering from the UK, you know, if you're looking at London as a whole, it's such an international sort of melting pot that they might be based in the UK, but there's a lot of foreigners as well living here. So it's a whole mix. It's not a clear picture as to whether they are, you know, British or not. But, yeah.
Just briefly, we almost started with this actually. It's the last question, I think, to Liz and maybe Peter, and maybe a market comment. Is it too late for someone to purchase and move to France or Spain prior to the transition period expiring? Liz, you got a thought on that?
Yeah, no, it's not too late. No, I mean, you just got to get in there, get across there, hopefully by the autumn. But get your property, you can get the residency process going, especially in Spain. I think Peter will have a view of how it can be a slightly longer process in France, but it depends if you're what residency, or if you just want to buy a property. But I mean, you can buy a property in both France and Spain as a non-British person, no difference. So it's mainly the people that actually want to go and live there full time that there's the rush on.
Peter?
No, absolutely. I mean, at the moment, nothing's actually changed. So we're still in the transition period. We still go and do exactly as you were doing before. We've obviously got the deadline to actually get things done, and that's what's pushing some people. And certainly we've had a lot of conversations with people saying, I need to do this by this date or whatever it is, because they've got certain objectives in mind. But yeah, no, it's certainly possible at the moment.
Okay, lastly, I promised the last one was the last one, but lastly for Rob, what are your thoughts on the Caribbean? Do you see them recovering as fast as the other destinations in the UK and abroad?
Again, it comes down to which destinations. You know, there are some that have historically performed very well. Barbados has been very strong for the British market. I think close to 90% of homes there are bought by the Brits. I think that's been changing slightly over recent years. But other upcoming markets such as Antigua, St. Lucia, they're doing, they have been doing very well, and they're a good alternative. The next question is going to be about flights, though, particularly with Virgin.
I say he may have an island available.
yeah, definitely.
I won't be bailing him out. It's really interesting because there's so many advantages, plus and cons from all the locations as well. Italy being closer to home than obviously the Caribbean, and then within driving distance, Spain and France and Portugal to extent. The market is still alive and kicking, clearly.
Well, the Caribbean also benefits from markets like the US and Canada. So, a lot of people are coming in from that.
And, obviously the tax regimes differ there as well, don't they? So,
some are buying for the citizenship schemes.
Yeah.
So the benefits there.
I think what we've learned today is we've just hit the tip of the iceberg, really, haven't we? There's so much to discuss. We've answered a fraction of the questions, hopefully as comprehensively as time has allowed. If anybody has any other questions, feel free to email us at our respective firms. We will be doing another webinar, hopefully in the next coming weeks. We might shuffle the panel a little bit, but otherwise, thank you all very much for joining us, and look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks, panel.